All right. So just a couple really quick pieces of information. We want to make sure that you know that you can ask questions. These are some of the kind of ground rules around trying to create an effective space for us to have this workshop. If you can remain on camera, it's easier for us to know who we're talking to, but totally understand in times, who knows what's going on in your background, and it's easier to have no video. Or if you're having any issues with any kind of jumpiness or anything like that, often it can help to turn off your video and just listen in to improve the internet connection. Please be available on mic if you're going to ask questions so that we can communicate with you. But in the meantime, if you're willing to mute yourself, it'll be very helpful for the other listeners. And then all I want to do is call your attention to the very bottom piece here where we are in a workshop, but we also know we've got a million things going on. We are working through a current pandemic, and we want to make sure that we know we're having grace with ourselves. I will work hard after my section here at the beginning to assist Carl and Dannielle with helping to mute or unmute individuals, and also if you have questions to be putting those into the chat box. For anyone that's newer with Zoom, this little graphic helps to show you where things are. So on the far left side is where you can mute and unmute yourself. This may move around based on your computer or device that you're utilizing and when we're sharing screen. So sometimes you have to go up to the top of your computer screen to get it to pop down. Sometimes it's at the bottom. Kind of have to look for it a little bit sometimes. You can stop your video or turn it back on right next to that. And then just to the right of that is where the participants box is. That's an important box for yourself because if you do want to use any of the non-verbal cues within Zoom, that's where they're located. So I will be watching for people to raise their hand, or if there's a couple that say go slower or go faster. If you have a question, there are a variety of ways to get a hold of us through those non-verbal cues, or just write in the chat box. Chat box is just to the right of that a little further. I'm going to ask if you would to pop open that chat box and just write your name and the organization you are with or representing in that chat box now. So if you can get that chat box open, write your name and the organization that you are with. That'll be really helpful for us. Jason, Dale. Fabulous. It looks like everyone is finding that chat box. If you're just jumping in, if you would in your chat box, just write your name and the organization you're with. We actually won't go around in a formal introduction to everyone online today. So this is helpful for everyone that's popping in and they can see who's on there if they've got questions for you or they're trying to connect. So we'll dive into our content here. So like we said, we're back. We're here to help you remember how this tool can be utilized, what Minnesota Collaborative is all about. So we are a partnership that seeks to inspire investment in our zones. That's the gist of it. The intention is to have some social impacts. We are hoping to see job creation, more attainable housing, and revitalizing our communities. We were really seeing a lot of movement in this front prior to COVID, and now it's really started to come back out again as a potential recovery tool. For those of us who are in their faces, this is myself and Carl, our teammate, and down south, we've been working with Lynn over the last couple years on this project. He's been very helpful in the southern part of our state. We have to thank our founding partners, the people that have helped this collaborative stay afloat and brought us back this year to make sure that we're able to share this content, not forget that opportunity zones still have a very long life of benefit for those that can utilize it for development. So 3 components that we're really all about is the statewide collaboration. Part of that is just getting people together and sharing information. We have now restarted our bi-monthly webinars. The first one will be on June 23rd this month at 1:30. And if you go to that events page on the website, you can see the next that are coming up after that, and who will be presenting. From an education standpoint, we're doing workshops like this. So trying to hone in certain areas, have smaller conversations in hopes that people can really ask the questions that they're trying to understand or gather, or just even to get ideas about what our projects looking like across the region. And then of course we have the directory. So if you go onto the website, right now we actually have over 60 listings in that directory. The goal of this directory was to display the different types of investment opportunities that are out there for potential investors, to create that interest, and also for people to see what are people doing, what does a project look like. These are posted on this website and also on the Opportunity Exchange, which is a national listing for projects across the United States. And if you were to check out the Opportunity Exchange, you'll see that Minnesota has quite a few listings, and we're ranked up there with many of the other larger states. I was actually surprised last time I looked how many of our listings are out there and how we compare nationally. What that can look like and what that directory allows is a lot of storytelling capability. So you're able to put imagery on there. You're able to really talk about the project details and description, even tell that potential investor about the developer, what their background is, what they're looking at doing. Gives you a lot of space to talk about the impact that this project hopes to happen in the communities as well. Source and uses. There's plenty of space to talk about the project that you're looking at. And we identify those in 3 different types. If it's real estate development, operating business, or just available property. So we'll see on there listings of available property or buildings that are empty, that are in opportunity zones and open for that development. This is just where that directory is located on the website. Everyone that has registered will receive this PowerPoint after our webinar. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. And I'm going to be handing it over here to Dannielle. I'm the short starter here. And I'm going to stop my screen share, Dannielle, so you can take over.
Perfect. Thank you. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. See the slides as well? Just making sure we're off to a good start. Okay. So first, thank you for the intro. I appreciate it. Having worked with a lot of different states throughout the country, it's really nice to see, this group kind of put together and really to kind of direct the resources around people learning about what these are. Depending on which state and communities, I work with, it's drastically different. So I think the kind of goal of my piece today is really to give a high-level overview of what opportunity zones are, and then as well as maybe some of the changes that have happened either recently from the final regulations or just from some technical corrections that have happened, as well as really a notice that came out last week regarding some extensions due to COVID. So I'll kind of just give a brief overview. I have about 45 slides here. I'm definitely not going to go through them all. So, we want to leave time at the end for people who have questions, but so just kind of skim at the high level aspects of opportunity zones. So to give a little background on myself, I'm a senior manager at Wipfli. I work in our real estate group and I lead our opportunity zone practice for the firm. So I have probably helped set up around 40-ish so of these opportunity zone funds or consulted on them. So I've spent a lot of time on it, particularly in the last year or so, kind of, well, 2 years almost at this point, learning all the regulations. Wipfli in and of itself, just to give you a little background, we're a nationwide firm, top 20, I think, as far as all CPA firms. We have, kind of markets, as you can see, throughout the country. And I think this isn't even updated probably for the latest few, but essentially we go to market by industry. So that's why I specialize in real estate. So a lot of the things that I work with are real estate partnership type transactions. So they really kind of work hand in hand with opportunity zones. So kind of as previously mentioned, mostly going to focus on opportunity zone regs and the updates, and then a few of these other kind of aspects throughout. So in general, kind of what opportunity zones are. We'll go through this quick just in case, don't want to be oversaturate people with stuff that they already know. So this came out of the TCJA Tax Reform Act that was part of 2017. And essentially what they were really looking to do is to tap into the $6 trillion of capital gains that they saw out there and reinvest them into communities that were in low census income tracts. So what they did in order to kind of inspire people to, be motivated to do this, they created this opportunity zone program, which essentially has kind of 3 benefits that we'll get to soon. But essentially what you need is a capital gain kind of from any source to be able to invest into an opportunity zone fund to get these benefits. And there's certain qualifications on what that gain needs to be. It can't come from a related party, but other than that, and maybe a few other things, as long as you invest into an opportunity zone fund within 180 days, you're pretty good. So this can include stock sales, partnership interest sale, maybe a gain that someone has from a K1. So it's very liberal. It just pretty much doesn't allow for ordinary gains to be included in the deferral. There's also quite a few mechanisms on when your 180-day investment period starts. I have a few slides for it later on. It's definitely something, if you're working with people either as the person creating the fund or in general, it's something I highly recommend them reaching out to their CPA for. So even the funds that I work with, if it's an individual investor that, I don't work on personally, I don't do the tax return for that individual investor, I recommend they reach out to their CPA just because there's so many fact patterns to go into it. And it's just a very key thing. You want to make sure you're meeting the deadline. So as far as kind of the benefits of opportunity zones, the ones on this slide are kind of the 3 main benefits. So we have the deferral itself. So you're going to recognize this capital gain, and then you're going to be able to defer it to either the earlier of when you sell your QOF investment or December 31st, 2026. So that essentially means that if I had a gain in 2020, I can defer it by putting into an opportunity zone fund and not pay tax on it until 2026 tax year. So in the 2027 year, you'd actually pay the tax. So that's kind of like the first benefit. The second one is depending on how long you hold the qualified opportunity zone fund, you'll get a step up in basis. So if you hold it for a total of 5 years, that original deferred gain is going to increase by 10%. So that's effectively cutting off 10% of the gain you'll pay tax on. And then if you would have held it for 7 years, it's reduced for another 5% to equal a total of 15%. Note that this expired, so this would have been people who had put in gain into a QOF by 12/31/2019. So it's no longer applicable going forward, but it is for people who had maybe past investments. And then finally, the main reason to kind of do opportunity zone funds is really the 10-year exclusion. So after you've held the qualified opportunity zone fund for 10 years, you can elect to essentially include that gain from taxation. There's a few mechanics there that they've really clarified with the final regs that I won't go into, but they've made it a lot more flexible and allow you to sell underlying properties and everything and flow that gain up through the K1 as part of this. So that's kind of the main benefit. I would say the other 2 are kind of just the cherries or sprinkles on top to kind of make this even better deal, but really the main benefit you're going to get is holding the QOF investment for 10 years. Here just kind of walks through a sample kind of investment. So you put the gain in June 30th, 2019 that you recognize January 2nd. In 5 years from now, you're going to get that step up in basis. So originally we had a $1 million gain. At 5 years, you're going to get 10% step up to equal $100,000 reduction in the gain. And then after 7 years, we're going to get a total of 15%. So that means that you are only paying tax on $850,000 of it. which is much better to pay tax on in 2026 for that tax return that you'll pay the tax on in 2027. So that's the benefit here of the deferral. You'll see it, instead of that $1 million gain, you're paying $850. And then in 2029, so 10 years later, that $1 million investment is now worth $3 million. So you effectively have an increase in value of $2 million. And as long as you've met all the requirements of a QF the whole time, none of this will be taxable. So very beneficial. The fund itself, we're getting into the mechanics of that. So it can be a partnership, corporation, S or C Corp, or an LLC that's taxed as either a C Corp or partnership. It just cannot be a disregarded entity. So you yourself could not create your own QF fund and have it not be a regarded entity. And that is something I've seen people kind of do perhaps incorrectly in the past. So it's something I like to mention. And then from there, kind of the main testing period here is that the Qualified Opportunity Zone Fund itself has to have 90% of its assets as Qualified Opportunity Zone property. And so what that really means is that that fund must invest into property. And 90% of its assets have to equal this qualified property in an OZ. And there's kind of two really ways you're going to get there. You're either going to invest in Qualified Opportunity Zone stock or Qualified Opportunity Zone partnership interest. Or in a rare circumstance, I see people where the QF owns property or the business directly. We usually advise kind of against it because it makes the testing requirements for the rest of the fund pretty difficult. So a lot of the times we usually set these up as two-tiered. So you have the QOF on the top and then the QOF, the QOZB, right below it as another partnership. And that's really, we'll kind of get into the mechanics of that, but it's really just due to the testing requirements. So there's certain requirements that stock or partnership interests need to meet. They're kind of on this slide. We won't spend too much time on them. Pretty much it just has to be acquired for cash. It has to be acquired after December 31st, 2017. Be new, or if it's existing, it has to meet the qualifications of being a Qualified Opportunity Zone business at the time it's bought. This kind of goes through that if the fund is going to hold the property directly, you know, how the property pretty much has to be held. But more importantly, it has the definition of Qualified Opportunity Zone business property. So Qualified Opportunity Zone business property is really going to be any tangible property that is used in the trade or business of either a fund or the Qualified Opportunity Zone business. It has to be acquired from an unrelated party after 2017. And either the original use must commence in the zone or must be substantially improved. And really, this is kind of like the heart of making sure that if you're investing with the Qualified Opportunity Zone business, that you're really doing something to create change in this community. What they wanted to avoid was someone buying kind of an old shack somewhere, not doing any improvements, and kind of just keeping everything the same. So if you bought a used building, what this substantial improvement requirement is saying is you pretty much have to double down the basis of that building. So say you bought it for $100,000, you know, 20,000 of it was related to land. That means that you have to put in $80,000 of land improvements for it to be considered substantially improved. And like I said, that's just mostly so that people are really investing into the community, making a change, and that they're able to see it. The original use piece, if we're looking at it from the stance of a building, that's mostly going to be if you're doing ground up construction, or if you bought it, someone else is constructing a building and you maybe buy it before they get the certificate of occupancy. So that will vary, but most of the time we'll see the substantial improvement or someone buying land and then building a building on top of it. The few other requirements, so if you have a Qualified Opportunity Zone business, so 70% of that business assets have to be that tangible business property, the definition I just had. And just to note, those can be either owned property or leased property, just depending upon what you end up doing. If you lease it, it can be leased from a related party. We kind of just have to look into a few things. if you buy a business, how the allocations work and so forth. If it was pre-existing, those kind of get a little more complicated, trying to figure out how the assets will end up qualifying. But in general, 70% of the trader business assets have to be qualified. If that qualified opportunity zone business had intangible property, it pretty much just has to be used to the active conduct of the trader business, at least 40% of it. And then in general, when the fund is kind of working, or the qualified opportunity zone business is working, less than 5% of the unadjusted basis of the property can be non-qualified financial property. And so what this is really getting to is they really don't want the qualified opportunity zone business to have just a bunch of excess cash. Like similar to the points I've kind of made, they really want to make sure people are investing, buying new property, bringing new things into this zone. So this rule was so people pretty much just didn't create an entity with just a bunch of cash. There is an exception for it if they have a working capital safe harbor. And a working capital safe harbor is the main reason to have a qualified opportunity zone business, really. And what that is you have a 31-month period to expend your cash based on a working capital safe harbor plan. This is very important for a lot of new businesses, particularly even, I think right now we've kind of talked a lot about real estate, but if we're talking about just a general business coming into an opportunity zone business, and they're a startup or anything, they're going to need quite a lot of time to, start up that business and need that cash to kind of just generate and stabilize their business. So the working capital safe harbor really provides for that. So you can have cash in excess of this 5% while your working capital safe harbor is going. They just want to make sure that you're then holding in a cash-to-cash equivalent. And that's primarily because they don't want you putting in these long-term things and kind of pretending that it's for, working capital safe harbor, and really you're just kind of getting cash out of it. And so one of the last kind of requirements is at least 50% of the total gross income has to be from business in the zone. And that's then making sure that, you're really operating in the area that you're doing your business. So, examples of people, I think before were just trying to have like a shell company with none of their business really happening there, but just putting it in a zone. So they wanted to prevent that. So the gross income really has to be derived from that area. And they came up with a few safe harbors that are listed on kind of this PowerPoint and how you'd figure that out. Kind of last note is qualified opportunity zone business can't be any sin business. So they don't want massage parlors, golf courses, liquor stores, and casinos. In the final regs, they kind of clarified a little bit of what they meant by some of these things and everything like that. But those are kind of the big things that you cannot have in these areas. So as far as kind of to take a couple steps back and discuss, I think beforehand I had mentioned that most of these are structured so that you have a qualified opportunity zone fund at the top as a partnership, and then a qualified opportunity zone business below hand. And that is primarily because that working capital safe harbor. So what happens when you don't have that particular structure? So say you only have your qualified opportunity zone fund, you get $2 million into it, and you're working maybe on constructing a building that's for a new startup business. Essentially all that cash is going to count against you during your testing periods. Without a working capital safe harbor, the IRS really wanted, and they kind of even mentioned in the final regulations, that their intent was that for them to push it down into another kind of entity. So just to reiterate that and kind of how they clarified that in the final regs, that the QOF itself would not get a working capital safe harbor. So this kind of just goes through the various kind of schedules that are required if you're having working capital safe harbor. A lot of people I work with are, I would say, have, this has been a big key point in making sure that people have actually written it down where they're going to spend their cash and everything like that. There are different updates for the working capital safe harbor. We'll get into some that are now related to COVID. But essentially for that 31 months, depending upon when your cash came in, you could extend it to a total of 62 months. So what they wanted to make sure that didn't happen is, come up in your 31 months, you're still raising capital or something like that, and then you have a big new capital influx and no way to kind of expend it, but also cap it out too, so people weren't just kind of milking it at the same time. So they kind of came up with this rule that you can have a maximum of 62 months to expend your cash, with some different rules and everything around that. They do allow for some delays based on governmental delays. If your project's just taking a long time to kind of push through the system, they're kind of allowing it to be told. This is kind of what they've come up with in some regards for COVID. So that's kind of the main piece there. There's a lot of nuances with what property counts as what at which time, and a lot of it really still needs a lot of clarification. Honestly, they kind of put out a new piece, I think, trying to clarify it, and they actually just kind of confused us all more with that current interpretation of it. But kind of a really good part that came out with the QOF testing is a lot of people thought, based on the testing periods for QOF, so it's twice a year, generally speaking. So say if a fund had started back in 2019, and in 2020, they're going to have a testing period on June 30th and December 31st. A lot of people were really afraid prior to this particular rule coming out that since no matter what, you have a December 31st testing period, that if they got cash December 1st, say $1 million, that they'd have to figure out how to spend it by December 31st, because you'd be subject to your 90% testing by then. So the IRS came out with a rule that allows you to disregard recently contributed property as long as within the last 6 months, and it was held in cash equivalents type situation. So that was a big deal for a lot of funds and allowed them more opportunity to find realistic deals to kind of do. They also came up with a cure period, which they later clarified in some technical corrections, that if a QOZB fails to meet their qualifications of being a business, that doesn't necessarily mean that the QF has to fail its test at that time and pay all the penalties. They do have a cure period of 6 months to kind of true that up and make sure that they're getting back on par. So this is a 30-month substantial improvement period. This is kind of what we already went over. Pretty much you buy a building and you have 30 months to kind of improve it. There's some other nuances here based on the adjusted basis of when you get the property. But high level, you buy a used building, you gotta improve it within 30 months. You get to pick the 30-month start date for the substantial improvement period, but at the same time, the property won't actually count as good assets for your testing period until you're in the substantial improvement period. So it's a little kind of play of when you can start that. The final regulations did come out with some good kind of news on how the substantial improvement test would work in regards to a building. Unfortunately, they did not really clarify a lot of rules in regards to if, say, a building had, or a qualified opportunity zone business bought a bunch of equipment or something like that that were used, how you'd substantially improve those. And that's kind of still a little more of a mystery on how that economically and mechanically works for a lot of QOZ businesses. So at least a lot of the ones that I work on are either leasing or buying new assets and bringing them into the zone, or used assets and bringing them into the zone. It's kind of really only a huge problem if you were to buy a qualified opportunity zone business in and of itself and try to kind of convert it into under all the OC regs, which I think a lot of people were kind of doing last year. So it's a little more of a mystery. There were a few things that kind of came out in regards to people that had existing opportunity zone property pre really these regulations. So maybe you had land or a building and how that would really work in the OZ. I think some people are thinking like, okay, I have a really rundown building, I'll contribute into the zone. My piece maybe doesn't qualify, but any improvements I do to that building should. Treasury pretty much said nope to that. And so if you had an existing non-qualified property that didn't meet the qualifications and you made improvements on that, No matter how easy it is in real life to kind of bifurcate those costs, Treasury is not allowing us. So that was one kind of disappointing thing that came out in the final regs. Let's skip this. Another big thing, so if we're looking at a real estate deal, you just have to ensure that in order to meet that active true to business standard, that you're not doing a true triple net lease. They've given a few more examples in the regulations on what their definition is. The problem is, in general IRS Treasury standards, they're not very good at defining things. And so we kind of just have to follow what seems to be in line with the intent of the regulations based on the examples that we have. As far as lease property, so I mentioned that before, that lease property does qualify as good assets in a QOZB. So this just kind of details which assets count, how they're valued for the testing period. A lot of very, very kind of detailed information we won't really get into. Another huge thing, debt finance distributions. So this would be a situation where maybe they were doing ground up construction, new maybe low income housing or something like that. And then on, year 5, after it's stabilized, they refinance it and do a big debt refinance distribution to all the partners. A lot of people are curious on how that effectively would be treated. IRS came up with some rules that pretty much laid out how this would be treated, and this generally will be not an event that would cause you to recognize your gain as long as it's structured correctly. Which was really good news for a lot of people, especially those in kind of the real estate realm. So as far as the actual mechanics of investing into a fund, I mentioned earlier, that's really something that is important to work with their CPA on to ensure that their 180-day period is correct. There's been a lot of changes between the final regulations and the proposed regulations. So these slides kind of go through those mechanics of when your 180-day time period starts, how is it different if it's an installment sale, if it's coming from a partnership, if it's coming from stock. All of them are very situational based. In general, it's easy to understand, but at the same time, it can be kind of confusing depending on how you're looking at it. So I'm just going to page through a few of these. I'm going to skip the real estate ones. So to kind of get into some of the updates on opportunity zones that have happened recently. So they issued some technical corrections in April. Essentially, they allowed for some better testing period for the valuation of the partnership interest. Originally, how the regulations were written is that if you were every 6 months, you effectively would have had to do evaluation of your partnership interest, which would have been terribly expensive and totally impractical at the same time. So they added a little language in there to clarify that you can use the unadjusted cost basis just for partnership interest. So that was very beneficial for a lot of people. They also worked on really clarifying a lot of how the safe harbors will work, whether or not you're getting the extension or if you're not getting the extension. And they also changed and sort of attempted to clarify when you could rely on the proposed regulations and the final regulations. But in all honesty, their statement was actually more confusing. I think in the final regulations, you had to rely on either or as in a whole, or and then they came out with a statement saying that you couldn't kind of cherry pick which ones you were doing. And in the corrections, they changed it to be you can rely on either as long as you're relying on them consistently. So not really sure what that means as far as being maybe able to cherry pick some areas, because they said they were against that, now for it. Kind of something you just have to talk through, your lawyer or CPA to see how they advise you and your fund to kind of do that. But probably one of the big changes is some language that they added as far as the treatment of property during the testing periods. And essentially, you know, a lot of the big questions that we had was how you treat, you know, property and development, or maybe say someone did have a bad asset, you know, they had land that they sold to the qualified opportunity zone business, or maybe some equipment that they sold, and it's bad asset on the books, but if we looked at the deal 2 years from now, you know, they would meet the 70-30% test. And based on, you know, these technical corrections, it adds a lot of leeway into that thinking, and pretty much it states in one way, if you read it, that as long as you're in that 31-month safe harbor period, that kind of working capital safe harbor is a good asset, so you wouldn't fail your test necessarily. Whether or not that's the IRS's intent is really the question. So depending on who you talk to, they'll come up with a different interpretation on how comfortable they are with that. Recently, so last Thursday at like 3:30, they came out with some extensions for opportunity zones based on COVID. So originally, I think in March, they had released some new rules regarding an investor time to invest in opportunity zone fund. And they now substantially extended that. So that's really good for anyone kind of on this call who has a deal that's looking for investors. Because essentially what they said is that if someone were to have their 180-day period time up, particularly by April 1st, or sorry, on or after April 1st, that means that they would really be extended till December 31st. So a lot of people were coming up to their 180-day time periods, either, you know, kind of at the end of this month, or maybe a few months from now. They have till December 31st to make those qualified investments, which is really big and kind of will help, I am hoping, a lot of QOs find their investors during this time period. Additionally, they are allowing funds that would have failed their 90% test standard, either because they haven't found an investment yet to do, to essentially kind of deem them as passing it during this time period. And any substantial improvement period, so that was when you were going to have to double down the basis either in equipment or buildings. It's told, so there is paused essentially, so none of these months between April 1st and December 31st will count in that 30-month time period. Very annoying to account for on the accounting side of it, but very great answer for kind of people who are just stuck either because they can't get, you know, construction work done, or the government to kind of keep moving forward on their deals. And additionally, so for QOZBs, they're allowing additional 24 months to expend the cash for their working capital safe harbor. So that essentially means, so they had the 31 months, and now they get an additional 24 to expend the cash. A lot of them probably won't need that, but it's really good to have if a fund ends up needing it based on, you know, kind of what they were trying to invest in. You know, I work with a few that were looking to do brand new operating hotels that are kind of looking at investments and trying to figure out what to do, or a lot of restaurants as well, that are obviously kind of just in this weird holding pattern until things get better. So that's kind of the high level overview of the final regulations and kind of opportunity zones. Definitely not inclusive, but at least that's what I got for now. So now I can send this over to you, Carl.
Thank you, Dannielle. Currently, I don't have any questions in the chat box. We do have just a couple minutes. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and verbally ask a question, I'm just going to allow for some time here for a moment to see if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask via voice. Feel free to just go ahead. It's a lot of content to take in. Again, this will be available. We'll email out the PowerPoint to everyone who was registered. All right, well, we'll keep going. Thanks, Carl. He has the next section, and thank you, Dannielle.
All right, thanks, Alyssa and Dannielle. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Carl Scheller, and I'm the research director and a consultant at the Northspan group. And you can all see my screen. All right, in that case, this next piece is going to start looking at understanding community leadership and how that can play a role in opportunity zone developments, and really also how we can make sure those developments then benefit the community. Especially since this workshop is targeted to Northeast Minnesota, we want to make sure that we're explaining it in a way that's relevant to the communities in this region, and that we sort of clear up any misperceptions, conceptions that there may be out there about opportunity zones. For example, that, oh, this is just something that's happening in urban areas, big money is getting thrown around and it's not relevant for small towns, or and also sort of countering some of the negative press that some people may have heard about opportunity zones earlier on in the program, where it's only going to luxury condo projects, or Amazon might benefit from it in New York, or some of the things that came out initially. But I think as we've been working in this opportunity zone space for over 2 years now here at Northspan, we've seen that it really can have a strong positive community impact in many areas, including parts of Northeast Minnesota. And we'll get into an example or two later on and how we've seen that in practice. So this part, we're really going to talk about what it takes to make those projects happen in these areas. So, and really the fundamental point that we kind of hit again and again when we do all these workshops is that you can't just wait for these projects to drop out of the sky, especially in a rural area where you might not have a ton of deal flow all the time in major real estate or business investments. So it's like, it takes a lot of work to understand on the front end what the community is looking for, and then sort of from there, creating a marketing pitch, bringing partners together and understanding how to get everyone on the same page and move these projects along. And so we kind of break this preparedness work into 3 areas. First one is building a team, and getting a group of people together to move these along, telling the story. So with that, taking all the background information that you need to really make that pitch and relay that information along, and then identifying potential projects that can really address community issues and solve some of the community's concerns. So to start with the process of building the team, and I think we've seen that it really happens on a couple levels. First off is just building the local knowledge base. That means attending webinars like these ones, or I think over the past couple of years we've been doing some our introductory level work. We've had longer presentations like Dannielle's today, where you get into some of the details of the mechanics of the incentive, but it really takes everyone on board to have some working knowledge of how this works to be able to move these projects along. So obviously city staff need to know what's going on here if these projects come along, but also looking at the EDA, some elected leaders, so that if a project comes up, that some of those misperceptions that exist don't end up derailing a project before it's too soon, and then making sure that you're bringing along groups like the local chambers of commerce and neighborhood groups, and making sure that they feel engaged and are part of any process to envision what a project might look like. And from there, you really need to build up your team of professionals who can help shepherd these projects along. You have CPAs and your legal team who can help structure these deals, since it's not something that someone walking in off the street probably has the know-how to do. So making sure that you have that capacity and having everyone lined up so that if there's a project ready, you have people available either in your community or who you have available on call who you can bring in and help you work through those details. You're going to be marketing certain properties, making sure that those property owners are on board and understand exactly what they're getting into. And also thinking broadly about who else can be a part of this discussion. You have examples here like county public health or faith leaders in a community who may be looking for specific community benefits and things that they could roll in and help, and also help bring the community along and build the pitch as a community, and bring more people on board and seeing, okay, this project has a real benefit for us, and so we should all be on board. So once you've built that team, the next step is really trying to figure out how to tell the story about why your location is the place to do an investment. So that starts with just, I think, a basic background information, a pitch that focuses on your key assets, what makes you a good place to do business. But really, I think we've seen this in whether talking about corporate site selection or business expansion discussions. People really need to know all of this background information up front, and if this information isn't available, they're most likely the community is going to be overlooked. So really having all that demographic information, the geographic information, if you're marketing a site, making sure that you understand what's going on with that site, maybe having it shovel ready or close to shovel ready, so that if a developer does come in, they're not going to get any surprises. They'll have all their utilities lined up. They'll have done the environmental work, so they're not going to stumble into a bunch of wetlands they didn't expect. And so doing all this background research work to understand, okay, yeah, yes, we really are ready to go. We can jump quickly, and having all your demographic information on hand so that if there are questions about, workforce availability, size, just have all this information ready. And that's something that we've tried to do through the Minnesota Opportunity Collaborative as we build out these profiles of projects. We can build in some of those details. And speaking specifically to this Northeast Minnesota audience, another Northspan program, Northland Connection, can also really help provide some of that background data, geographic information, demographic information. So if you need that information, we're here as a resource to help you out with that, and make sure you have that all ready to go. And really what you're trying to do here is build this pitch that targets a specific type of investor, and you're trying to target investors who we're calling impact investors. These people who are really trying to create a financial return for themselves. They are still investors. They still want to realize that gain. At the same time, they also have certain broader goods that they're trying to achieve. So maybe some social benefits, some environmental impact. They may have some tie to the community, so they're trying to give back to it in some way. So really you're trying to build a narrative that hits all of these pieces that you can appeal to a potential investor on a number of different levels. And this is a slide that we borrowed from our friends at Cogent Consulting, who are been involved in this area a lot. And so impact investing is really somewhere in the middle of this investing spectrum that they have on this slide here. So you have your traditional investing where you're just looking for the best rate of return. You have responsible investing where you might be looking to not do any harm necessarily in investing, but you still want like strong return. So and it's this impact investing is a little more concerned about social impact than those, but at the same time, this isn't just a grant. It's not just experimental venture philanthropy. It's really still looking for that return, still looking for that benefit, but also doing some good at the same time. And so from there, it's up to the community to really identify projects that really meet some of their needs. So from a community standpoint, that can really mean starting out sort of at the drawing board and doing some background work to understand what is the community needs, what could a new investment possibly bring us, and what would be realistic that could move us along here. So and then aligning that with the comprehensive plan, laying out what makes the most sense for the community. Where do we have identified land that's ready to go? Where do we have people who are willing to chip in and help out already? Who are there groups in place? And from there, can we work together and move something along? And then if there are potential tenants for a project, reaching out to them. Are there people in your community who may be in a space now, but they could use a newer building? They could be leasing in a larger project. They would be willing to go in on an existing project because it helps their supply chain somehow. So figuring out how to align all those needs and uses within the community and target projects that meet those needs. And I think in rural communities, there's often an attitude of, we'll just take anything that comes along, which, sure, that may be true, it's great, but at the same time, I think when you can make that precise pitch as to, we need this specifically, and that's why you're the perfect fit for us, that really increases your odds of success and shows that you've gone the extra step to prepare yourself. And just to give an example of a community in Northeast Minnesota that has an opportunity zone project, City of Silver Bay, so it's a community with less than 2,000 people, so very small rural area, not near any metropolitan area at all, really, on the North Shore, but it was designated as an opportunity zone back when the program came out in early 2018. It's a community, as many of you will know, it's as you're driving up Highway 61 on the North Shore, it has the huge North Shore mining plant, and that is really the staple of its economy. And obviously, it's a major employer and an important one for that area. But at the same time, the economy of the area is really tied to that single employer. And as the mine goes, so goes Silver Bay. And I think we've seen historically that Silver Bay is sort of a place people drive by as they're going up the North Shore, and it kind of misses out on all of the tourism activity up and down the shore. So. But here, I think, is a good example of a community that was doing a good job of laying the groundwork to think differently about that. And years even before opportunity zones came along, they started working on doing things like developing a marina just south of the mine along the shore there. They did some work to upgrade a beach that's also near there. This unique beach called Black Beach, and right by the beach they are now in the process of opening up a campground for which they got bonding money this summer. So it's a city that did a lot of work to try to think about how it can diversify its economy. And as it did that work, that they kind of stumbled into an opportunity, and that opportunity is the adventure park from the North Shore. And people in the picture there are Ellis Tibbetts and her partner Phil, who are the owners of that new facility. It's a concept that they had seen piloted successfully in other regions. It's sort of this adventure park that involves rock climbing and a ropes course and a whole bunch of other future phases that they have planned out for I guess adventuring, exploring, all in a confined little area, giving people, families going up the North Shore, sort of an introduction to a lot of these activities. And what they did is they looked at this vacant lot on the corner of the main corner in Silver Bay, where the highway meets the road that goes into the heart of town. Stoplight there. Had been a gas station on this corner, but that closed years ago. Just was kind of an empty lot and an eyesore on what should have been the gateway to the community. And realized they had an opportunity here. There was this big rock right next to it that they could sort of make their centerpiece of their rock climbing operation. So they started with that, and then from there they have now added the ropes course and are a couple phases into this 6-phase projects that they hope to continue to expand. They've created 16 new jobs in Silver Bay with the goal of creating 9 more, for a total of 25 by the time the project is done. And it's really meeting a lot of the goals that the community had set, long before they were even in the picture. So diversifying the economy, so they're now taking advantage of all this tourism traffic that's going up and down the North Shore. We're using this blighted former property and bring some real new life to it, and giving people a reason to stop and sort of look at Silver Bay as they drive up the shore and understand, hey, there's a real opportunity here. And maybe as long as we're here, we can go into town, visit some of the restaurants, some of the other businesses. We stay at the hotel that's right there. And so it's really an opportunity to grow and diversify that economy. So it's a great example of a project that has used Opportunity Zone funding to get off the ground. And I think they're seeking more to continue with the future phases of the project. And something that they've had success with. And it's a great example of how this can happen basically anywhere. And so one other area that we'll touch on before we wrap up here today is the idea of equitable development. And this is something that, I think we've touched on this in some of the previous discussion that, these communities are having processes, try to understand what's important for them. But this part really takes it a step further and asks, okay, how can we measure the potential benefits of these projects and even do a cost benefit analysis of, is this project worth it? Will it, do what we think it'll do? Is it worth the investment that maybe we may need to make up front to make it happen? And so I've seen a couple models that we've had come out already of how to measure these and see if they can be a good fit for communities. And the first one I'll mention is this Equitable Development Scorecard. So this is something that we learned about through some partners at a group called Nexus Community Partners, who are based in St. Paul. And we had the opportunity to have Terry Tao from that group present with us at a conference last year on this scorecard. And this is something that really the communities and community planners can use and sort of take that to understand where they are with the development, whether it fits their needs and how they can make it be useful. And they have one good example of how they've been able to do that themselves. So on the west side of St. Paul, which for those of you who are not familiar with the geography, is not actually west of St. Paul, it's south of St. Paul, but it's still it's an opportunity zone. It's this area where they use the scorecard, where the community group, the West Side Citizens Organization, came to the developer and worked through this and try to figure out, okay, how can we make this housing project go? And in this case, they were able to make this project get off the ground without using any public subsidy. And because the project was in a zone, they were able to have these units that were more affordable, so giving some workforce or affordable housing so that people who live there could stay there, still be able to afford it. They were able to honor all their contracts for prevailing wage and the requirements that they had in place for that, but at the same time, get this project going, but not have to do any TIF or tax abatement or any other, or go through the process of trying to get tax credits for a housing development. So it's just a very smooth, easy way to get this going along, and it's been a collaborative process from start to finish, where you have the the community group working with the developer to make sure that it's meeting the community need, and will continue to do so going forward. And that Equitable Development Scorecard, we have the link here. So if you want to check that out and if you think it'll be something it'll be useful to work through a project with, we have that available. Here in Duluth, LISC Duluth is also working on its own social impact investment framework. So I know that isn't quite done yet, but they've been working with coaching consulting on that, and that might once we see the final product, that might even be more relevant for Northeast Minnesota than the Equitable Development Scorecard, which sort of had a Twin Cities audience in mind when it was created. So a lot of resources out there to help communities move these projects along. So that's most what we have today. I'll just sort of run through a couple of the resources that we have available. So Minnesota Opportunity Collaborative, Alyssa's posted the link in the chat. And of course, we'll get the PowerPoint after this presentation too, but you can see our website at MNOppCo.com. So you can see the directory, information on some of our upcoming events, and also just a library of resources to help further understand opportunity zones. We have a couple of our partners highlighted here, including MNOZA, which is an operating opportunity zone fund, Community Partners Playbook from LISC, which is a group that has done a lot in the opportunity zone area to try to think about especially that equitable development piece, making sure they're driving in investment into these lower income communities that make sense for them. And as we showed you earlier, we also have these forms that you can use to submit the different types of projects to be listed in the directory on the MNOppCo website. One for real estate developments, one for operating businesses, and one for available property. This slide is a not exhaustive and list of potential resources that are out there, legal and accounting resources, including Dannielle. If you are looking for some, these are just some people we know who are operating in this area who may be worth reaching out to. And if you know of anyone in your community who we do not have here, please let us know and we'd be happy to add them. And so with that, I will open it up for questions.
Carl, we have one question to start, and it's if you could explain more about the financial setup of the adventure park. I did put the link in there because it has some good description, but if you have any other details you can share about how Alice had put that together.
Sure. I can't say I know all the details of what they've done there, but I know that's something that we were careful to do is do it in a phased approach, so that they were able to raise some funding for the first round of it, which is just the rock climbing, and I think they were able to do a lot of that themselves, as the two owners were, and then from there, then they started going out and seeking opportunity zone funding. That's where they were able to find some partners to share in the project, and sort of opened it up and brought a few others in, and got that construction done on the ropes course. And yeah. I think they'll just look from there.
Yeah, I know that because of how they've been able to structure it so far, they have no debt on that project.
Right, yeah.
Helpful for a tourism project. Any other questions? People feel free to unmute yourself and just ask as well. Just a few people that hung on till the very, very end. Well, I just want to say thank you to Dannielle for joining us today. We had a Rocket Large group for a while, and I know people had to go in and out, had to lock the meeting and then unlock it. So we're getting better and used to that too. So thank you, everyone. Got some comments in the chat box. Thanks for everyone for participating. And our regular, we're doing a few workshops like this. You can find out all the information when we're getting back together on the event section of the website. And we will be adjourned. Thanks again, Dannielle, and everyone. Will see you soon.
Thank you.